For this batch, I'm combining two of my favorite brewing practices. One, making an IPA. I just love having a hoppy, fresh beer on tap. Two, trying out some more dried yeasts. This time, I'm trying Lallemand BRY-97 versus Cellar Science Cali Ale yeast. I've heard lots of good things about BRY-97. I've never used it, so I was interested to give it a try. How do you think it's going to stack up? Well, let's get brewing. Hey, didn't I just put out a video on brewing a Fresh Hop IPA? Yeah. It's not all about me trying to milk 2 videos out of 1 brew day, though I will say that helps with my once a week video goal. But I figured it'd be better to separate out a video focused on brewing a Fresh Hop IPA with homegrown hops, and this video comparing 2 dry yeasts, Lallemand BRY-97 and Cellar Science Cali Ale. If you want more info on growing, drying, and brewing with fresh hops, check out the video linked at the end screen of this video. Here, I'll just include a quick overview of the recipe and the brew day, making sure to include some shots of the fresh hop additions. I went with a very simple recipe with hope that it would showcase the hops and yeast differences. I'm pretty sure this beer came in well under the calculated 85 IBUs. IBUs are hard to predict with homegrown hops. I often target my IPAs in the 6.5% ABV range, but I decided to bump this one up a bit with a target around 7.5%. I'll cycle back to cover the actual values that I got for each yeast later in the video. The grain bill for this one was close to a 50-50 blend of mutton super pale and crisp Maris Otter malts. I used a little higher percentage of the mutton's pale ale, just to use up the last of my supply. This batch did not get a traditional bittering hop addition, and I did not dry hop this one either. Instead, the first hop addition was 4.3 ounces or 122 grams of my dried Chinook with 10 minutes left in the boil. I then chilled the wort down to 180 degrees Fahrenheit or 82 degrees Celsius and added another 4.3 ounces or 122 grams of homegrown Chinook cones. I then let this steep for 20 minutes before chilling. I then divided the wort up into 2 fermenters and used my fermentation chamber to finish off the last little bit of chilling before it was time to pitch the yeast. With the wort chilled down to 64 degrees Fahrenheit or 18 degrees Celsius, it was time to pitch the yeast. I direct pitched 1 entire pack of yeast into each fermenter. Each fermenter had about 2.6 gallons or 10 liters of a 1068 wort. Given that this was a reasonably high gravity wort, 1 entire pack per fermenter was a decent pitch rate. I guess I did not record adding the BRY-97, but I used the same process for that pack as well. I just sprinkled it on top of the wort. BRY-97 has a reputation for being slow to start, and that was definitely not the case in my situation. At the 24-hour mark, the BRY-97 batch was showing solid signs of fermentation. On the other hand, the Cali Ale batch was just thinking about starting up. At the 24-hour mark, the BRY-97 batch was churning along. The Cali Ale batch was still slowly starting up. This is very similar to what I saw with the last IPA that I used this Cali Ale with. I think that Cellar Science Cali Ale is just repackaged US-05, but I don't recall having these long lag times with US-05. Here on day 6, the Cali Ale batch was finally in full swing, while the BRY-97 batch was looking like it was winding down fermentation. I usually boost up ferment temperatures around day 3 or 4 when fermentation starts to slow. Given the slow ramp up for the Cali Ale batch, I held the fermentation chamber at 64 degrees Fahrenheit for 7 days before ramping up temperatures to finish off fermentation. On day 16, it was time to keg these beers. Even though the BRY-97 batch got off to a much faster start, it is looking like it has more yeast still in suspension, while the Cali Ale batch is starting to drop clear. Since these batches were not dry hopped, I did not bother with cold crashing. I'll figure they drop clear in a week or 2 in the keg. Both batches started with the same original gravity of 1068. The Cellar Science Cali Ale batch ended up fermenting down to 1009. That's an 86% attenuation given an ABV of 7.8%. The Lallemand BRY-97 batch ended up a little closer to where I would expect, with a final gravity of 1012 with 81% attenuation, giving an ABV of 7.5%. As we take one last look at these beers, be sure to subscribe so you get notifications of my future content. Have you had experience with these yeasts or other dry yeasts for American IPAs? Do you think Cali is actually the same as US-05? Well, let me know in the comments. So here the beers are. Here's the BRY-97 batch, and here's the Cellar Science Cali Ale batch. So today my evaluation is going to focus more on the yeast-driven differences between these two beers. So first we dig into the appearance of these beers. They're really a pretty beer, nice golden color. I don't see a difference between the two. I think right now there's maybe a little more head on the Cali Ale one, makes it look a little darker. They both pretty much drop pretty clear. Neither of them are really a crystal clear beer, but they're looking pretty solid. I'm not really seeing much difference in the head retention on either beers either. So let's go in for aroma. So here's the BRY-97 beer. I get a nice light hop character. A little bit kind of a perceived sweetness is what I would say. And let's go for the Cellar Science. So again, it's interesting. I get some of the same aroma that I got for the last IPA that I made with the Cellar Science Cali Ale. It's hard to describe it, whether it's an alcoholic note or an astringency. Let's go in then for taste on these beers. So the BRY-97, really nice and clean beer. It definitely accentuates that sort of tropical notes from those homegrown Chinook hops that I was saying. So the first video I made, I evaluated the Cellar Science Cali Ale version. And I'd pointed out that I really was getting this nice kind of tropical pineapple-y kind of character from the Chinook hops. For the BRY-97, I'm just getting a lot more of that same similar character. Just a kind of a nice combination of hoppy flavors with a little bit of a backbone of bitterness. Let's go in for the Cali Ale. So it's very similar, but these are definitely different beers. I get a little bit of that character. I'm not quite sure how to describe it. It's a little bit of a dry character, a little bit of, kind of accentuates a little bit of the bitterness. And I think that's where I was a little surprised with my last IPA that I brewed with the Cali Ale. It just seemed a little like the IBUs were higher and maybe a little bit of an astringency. I'm not quite sure what that would be related to. Both the last IPA and this batch that I did with the Cali Ale definitely took a while to get going, and the fermentation was kind of slow. So I don't know if it's just kind of a fermentation side effect. So if we look at body of this beer, definitely I think both beers have a fairly medium body, and it's light enough to be refreshing, but it's heavy enough there to let you know you're drinking a higher ABV beer. So I don't know if I get any difference in mouthfeel between the two. I definitely get some sort of different palate sensations. The BRY-97 just having a little bit more of kind of this fullness, a little bit more of a sweetness. Cali Ale yeast just being a little bit more harshness. I would say, I don't want to say dry and full because that implies they have different mouthfeel. That's not really the case. So if somebody had told me what I was drinking was an experiment where one of the beers had a little bit more chloride to kind of boost up the body and the other one had a little bit more sulfate to kind of boost that sort of dryness and the hop character. So the character I get in this beer is almost what I would expect from your typical description of sulfate versus chloride character. The BRY-97 just has a really nice balance. It's got sweetness, it's got hop, it's got a little less sort of perceived IBUs and bitterness. Whereas the Cali Ale, the hop character is just a little bit more bright, a little bit more sort of a little punch of some hop, but it also kind of has a little bit more bitterness that initially started off maybe a little bit of astringency and then just kind of mellowed out to be kind of this background bitterness. So I think that's probably my overall takeaway from these two beers as far as the difference, is that the Cali Ale one just has a little bit more of a hop bitterness pop to it, whereas the BRY-97 in this particular case is just really nice and smooth, really balanced between sweetness and hop and bitterness. It's pretty hard to come up with a full evaluation of any ingredient, say like a yeast or a hop or a grain, in just one batch of beer. Between these two particular beers, I really like the BRY-97. It's definitely a yeast I'm going to plan to use more. As far as the Cellar Science Cali Ale, given the fact that I had two batches that were really slow to ramp up, and they had a little bit of a kind of a harshness that I don't particularly like, I'm not really sure that I'm going to use the Cellar Science Cali Ale again. So while my understanding is that Cellar Science Cali Ale is just a repackaged US-05, I'm not quite sure that's the case. And I really haven't used US-05 a ton. I was really kind of using liquid yeast for a lot of years. But in my limited experience, I really didn't have the slow takeoff that I had with these two Cellar Science Cali Ale batches. I don't know if it's just the packs that I got at my local homebrew shop that were in bad shape or something, but it was enough that it kind of turns me off from using the yeast again, even if it saves 50 cents a pack. So I'm definitely going to use the BRY-97 again, so look out for that. What about you? Do you use dry yeast for pale ales and IPAs? Do you have a favorite one, something other than US-05? If you want a little bit more info on growing your own hops and brewing a beer with it, make sure to check out the link to this video. Also, if you enjoy this type of investigative type brewing, be sure to click on this playlist for more examples. Clicking that like button really does help me out. It gives YouTube a signal to recommend my videos to other people. And if you enjoy this kind of content, make sure you subscribe so I show up in your feed. Cheers!